Hey, good morning, good afternoon. This is Eddie from Polarity. We're just gonna wait a few more minutes for some other folks to join. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us. Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Once again, this is Eddie Mitchell from Polarity. We're just gonna give like maybe 2 more minutes for some other folks to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again. Good morning, everyone. This is Eddie Mitchell from Polarity. So we're going to go ahead and I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague here, Vitaly Kremez from AdvancedIntel.com. So we're going to go through the webinar, 3 ways to triage threats faster with Polarity and Advanced Intel. So let me go ahead and advance to the next slide here. So we're just going to go over a really quick intro, and then I'm going to give a brief primer on what is Polarity. Polarity is a very unique capability in the space. So I'm going to kind of give a brief primer on what the tool does. And then I'll turn it over to Vitaly that'll give an overview of the Advanced Intel and AdvIntel platform. And then once that's completed, we'll do a joint presentation where we'll show the integration between Polarity and the AdvIntel platform. And then we'll open up to Q&A at the end. So really quickly, Vitaly Kremez, I'm joined by as the CEO and the founder of Advanced Intel, and I am the lowly solution architect on the Polarity team. So really quickly, the rationale behind Polarity. So as I mentioned, Polarity is a very unique capability in the space. The tool was born out of a fundamental problem of data awareness. So 2 of our 3 founders were former intelligence analysts working for the US federal government. And they ran into a recurring problem where they would be working investigations or cases, and they would see unique entities, traditional indicators of compromises, unique names or aliases that were tied to the investigation that they were working on. And they really wanted a better mechanism for being able to record their thoughts or their notes around those entities that were tied to the investigation, to give them the awareness that not only had they perhaps seen those entities at some point in the past, but also give them the awareness that perhaps one of their colleagues was already working on an investigation related to that particular entity. So it's got that kind of cliched problem where like two analysts were investigating the same thing at the same time. They were unaware that they were doing that, which would obviously lead to a significant amount of time being wasted in terms of duplication of effort. But more than just bringing awareness that somebody else had potentially seen that unique entity or indicator on their screen at some point in the past, how do we facilitate rapid recall of contextual information to sort of speed the decision-making process? So there's really two capabilities that Polarity offers to solve this problem of data awareness and recall. So number one, you have the ability to add what we call annotations around any text on your screen. So like if you had a traditional IOC on your screen, like an IP, a domain, a file hash, something like that, or even non-traditional sort of uniquely identifiable strings on the screen, like perhaps a user agent string, an email subject line, you have the ability within the tool to add your own notes, or as we call them, annotations on any text on the screen. So really the benefit there is not only do I have instant recall of my own notes, if perhaps that subject line or user agent string is on my screen at some point in the future, but we're also facilitating this enhanced level of collaboration where other Polarity users, right, that you maintain a trust relationship with, if they see those same entities on their screen, they'll get my notes and vice versa. And then the secondary capability, aside from being able to add user level annotations into the system, we facilitate recall of third-party information as well. And that's where the joint solution between Polarity and AdvIntel comes into play. So whatever data source, whether that's an open source, commercial feed, or even an internal proprietary data set that you want to point your Polarity deployment at. So like, for instance, if an indicator is ever on your screen, or perhaps a CVE ID is ever on the screen, you can feed Polarity real-time information from whatever that particular data source that you want to query comes from. So again, annotation or connect to data you want to remember or recall. And then what makes Polarity so much more interesting, right? Rather than just being able to take annotations and recall information, is the method that we leverage within the tool to perform that information recall. So we leverage a proprietary technology, what we call computer vision. So computer vision is our fancy term for real-time text-based optical character recognition, or OCR. So what the Polarity desktop application is doing is, if you're operating Polarity in one of the real-time modes, we're actually analyzing the text that's physically being rendered on your computer monitor in real time down to the pixel level. So the main benefit of that is it doesn't matter what client-side application you happen to be working within at a particular moment. You could be analyzing malware in a virtual machine. You could have an RDP session open. You could be analyzing network traffic in Wireshark or some other forensics tool. As long as the text is visible on your computer monitor, Polarity can recognize the text automatically and in real time perform those enrichments and bring you that information recall for you. And then, as I mentioned before, through that annotation capability, the ability to add your own user level annotations around text on the screen, we're really building up what we refer to as a collective memory for your organization, right? So these annotations, right, these user level annotations are being shared throughout Polarity users within your organization. So you're really, kind of building up this collective knowledge internal to your organization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over at this point to Vitaly, and he's going to give you a really quick primer on the AdvIntel platform. So let me go ahead and stop sharing really quickly, Vitaly, and you can go ahead and take over the share and give the intro to AdvIntel.
Certainly happy to do it. Thank you, Eddie, and thank you for inviting myself and me to speak on a AdvIntel product. We are beyond excited and thrilled to partner with Polarity, specifically with an integration side. So a few introductory notes. So about myself. So essentially, my name is Vitaly Kremes. I'm a CEO and chairman of a company called Advanced Intelligence. So this is the view into our AdvIntel platform. Our AdvIntel platform was born out of the unique need in our industry is to essentially build a platform that fights both the sort of like prevents threats proactively, the threat prevention component, but also loss avoidance. How do we turn the actionability of our data sets and our reporting to the maximum level? So focused on the low noise ratio across any of our alerts, but also create the unique view into adversarial perspective. And AdvIntel is also the name that was inspired by one of the Diablo games I used to play when I was younger, which was the female force that was used to essentially, which was very powerful. So our product signifies that we use the evil for good. What we believe the cornerstone of a AdvIntel experience is that the product aims to provide the most intimate adversarial perspective into the underground. So meaning that whenever we deal with cases, we want to see the world from the eyes of a criminal. We want to see the world from the eyes of a ransomware extortionist. And that allows us to be proactive and predictive. So this is a quick view into the platform. The platform, when you log in, basically we provide a view into the latest reports published. This is one of the reports we published today. It's called Botnets That Happen in Vegas, but they do not stay in Vegas. We identified specific company compromised in Nevada casinos via our botnet breach information and intelligence. So one of our major use cases within the platform and our integration with Polarity, how do we augment the visibility in our botnet world with Polarity integration? Here you can see we published, for example, we found one victim infected on November 24th to be infected. Also, whenever you browse or leverage the really amazing tool Polarity, and you want to be more successful in essentially running searches, you can also connect with our integration and specifically use to enrich any data sets of interest as you're looking for. So for example, a company domain can be present here. And this is our report related to that. So all the reports are parsable and available gladly via integration itself. The product looks similar to what our finished intelligence collections. This is the intelligence piece where we highlight the botnets and breaches of affected companies specified by different categories and names. For example, many of us heard about the Baltimore infection. Essentially, schools were infected. So we oftentimes provide information and reporting related to that when we identify what's the precursor, what's the patient zero in many of those cases, or we outline specific compromised hosts and networks affected. So it's very sensitive, but it's also very actionable and accurate in many cases. So this is the world of intelligence. Intelligence is the unique window into the adversarial finished information that we provide. Not only we have reports and actor dossiers, sort of like threat actor profiles, we also provide indicators of compromise here. So for example, whenever we survey different groups, it could be Zloader or TrickBot or Bazaar Backdoor, we provide unique adversarial indicators of compromise. This is not the usual indicators of compromise from reverse engineering efforts, but from the unique view into the infrastructure as we track part of the AdvIntel. AdvIntel also integrates with the OpenCTI. For example, a lot of our information in AdvIntel profiles are focused on surveying into the groups, including Bazaar Backdoor, Quackbot, and Ryuk, for example, Zloader. Not only we provide that view into the actors who run the campaigns, but we also map to our knowledge. What specific MITRE ATT&CK frameworks do the actors use? What their techniques, tools, vulnerabilities, incidents we know of. So it's a full end-to-end cyber threat intelligence cycle. So when the teams have some knowledge and efforts and capabilities to collect specific groups, we augment and make them very successful across the spectrum of our collections. We also provide full indicators, of course, for many of the groups, including Yara signatures, CVEs, and map it to MITRE ATT&CK framework. So that's the open cyber threat intelligence nexus to AdvIntel. On top of that, we also have collections where we specialize and focus on looking into the botnets that produce the records. For example, some of our botnet collections span across many different sources, from TrickBot to Zloader to Bazaar Backdoor. So you can see the metrics surrounding some of our infections as we collect. And we make the searches available through the platform. Could it be an IP record, or it can be domain record? We can happily augment visibility of the analyst into the most intimate telemetry and victimology of the infected victims. We use this actually data set in many cases to identify victims of certain breaches before they sort of become ransomware victims. The motto of the platform and what the spirit of AdvIntel is to proactively identify infections before they turn into ransomware. And we'll dive deeper with Eddie and Polarity team into the exact integration points. So from our standpoint, we collect not only have deep visibility into the bot metrics, so to speak, as I showed earlier, the botnet infections, but also we survey the darknet as well, as we'll show you very deeply in a second, where we focused on the most interesting high fidelity dark web forums and communities that produce the most number of interesting, notable intelligence and hits. So in many cases, we focus on those that has the most number of hacker and experts specifically within the cybercriminal communities, including Amerta, Exploit, and others. And we'll be using this as an example to drive some, for example, vulnerability management practices. So we can search for example, at what point of time the actors speak to certain vulnerabilities. For example, for the last 15 days, we can search by CVE, wildcard, for example, across our collections. What are some of the latest reports from different forums? For example, the forum name can be XSS, and the criminal actor in Russian describes that they're looking for the trade vulnerability for CVE 2017-11-8082. And that's the vulnerability that's used routinely as the first infection attack vector during the mass targeted spam. You can also see that the threat is called Microsoft Office exploit, error silent sound exploit for sale. So that's also, so you can search for vulnerabilities in any different use cases. Not only that, we also provide our customers view into the dark web economy. So how many cards are exposed in our sourcing? What are some of the underground shops that sell the data? So for example, we can see that we also collect not only cards stolen from e-commerce merchants, but also from the real point of sale terminals. This is the data set called Track 1 and Track 2. This number of credit cards we observed. This is the type of breaches and pricing per card. So we can always dive deeper into outline how many cards we have for the pricing of 13, 16, 60 prices, what type of the cards exposed, what some type of the bins, etc. Not only we have that, but we also have CVVs, cards exposed from the merchants that simply like Amazons of the world, where you enter the website, your credit card information. We can see the pricing of the card, so we can see the number of breaches. You can always click and filter within the platform and provide sort of like the view and snapshot into the underground economy of any selected filtered choices for you. So that's used by our fraud teams to measure how and what the pricing of underground goods for their assets and report to the executives. That's one of the excellent use cases. Not only that, but we also collect the bots available. For example, we collect some of the sources, including top tier account shops like LPP, and we look for also Genesis. Genesis is the bot marketplace, where through Genesis we can identify the number and exact bots compromised, bots for sale. So you can see, for example, on December 10, we identified the new bot was offered for sale with the IP records 5.249 with those other resources and URLs available. So it's a perfect tool for monitoring the exposed data sets within the dark web. So the keywords and monitoring solutions are based on serving and assets across not only through botnets collections we outlined and showed you earlier, that we'll dive deeper in a second, but also through the darknet and dark web itself. Not only we have that, we also have a sandbox solution as well. All customers are using the modified Cape instance, where you can submit in 4 different machines, Windows 10 and Windows 7, for example. Also, we have, and you can see the latest submissions within the platform. So that's used by our customers to visualize essentially and submit any malware of interest through the AdvIntel platform directly. Watch is another interesting aspect within the platform that allows to see not only ransom leaks in Tracker, but also the organizations that have been breached that are used to queries here. So for example, Fourth Judicial District Court that was compromised was on the Tracker at some point of time on September 10, compromised by the group called Conti Ransomware. We identified them to be the victim on August 29. And actually 4GDC had a ransomware incident that was reporting news in September 10, 14. So our value of our AdvIntel product is to be preemptive and predictive. So we see breaches before they turn into public news. And that's our primary use case. We focus on 3 sources here. It's the Pulse VPN. For example, in many cases, Pulse VPN has been the precursor or the initial infection vector that led to ransomware cases, RDP compromise as well, and botnet-based intrusions. And that's the Watch. Also, on top of Watch, there is also fraud component here where we survey fraud incidents and point-of-sale terminal breaches as well, part of the platform. Here we have generate alert functionality. Intel requirements can be easily filled in through an AdvIntel platform that we use to track and note-taking functionality within the platform, but also used for unique visibility and unique tracking across the your company requirements. So if the requirement is to track down internal asset exposure through major botnets, we happily assign that to be an Intel requirement and work with the customer. Request information, we have a platform built-in ticket platform that allows us to survey essentially and provide customer view to file requests within the platform for our expert team to process requests and be an augmentation of the team that you have internally. So we can serve as experts within your team and help answering the most difficult, complex questions nobody else could. API documentation, we have a rich API endpoint information here. So we use API to find and automate unique botnet lookups, for example, dark web lookups, and we'll dive deeper with Eddie and Polarity team, part of integration, how the data looks like. User management, that's also a field we use for password control and two-factor authentication, time filters, and keyword alerting. So that's pretty much AdvIntel in a very quick ways. As one of the major points of integrations, as we outlined, for example, whenever you survey threads and you read the news stories, you will have an access to AdvIntel's the most intimate view into adversarial reports. For example, our reports differ in depth and quality and based on our unique botnet visibility, where you'll be able to identify the exact victims infected and affected by botnets that lead to major intrusions. This is one example when we identify one casino in Vegas was compromised. We also identified, for example, top lawyers being infected and or offered for sale on underground. We also, one of my favorite type of reporting that we have, part of AdvIntel, is also whenever you're searching for different ransomware groups, you'll be able to see what's our malware anatomy of the attack, what the malware group does, how do they fingerprint, what's the malware chains we observe. For example, the IcedID malware that leaks from Cobalt Strike to Defray 777 or Ransom EX ransomware, what the methodologies they use to deploy and attack other companies, what the scripts they leveraged, what's the timing of those scripts, and how it looks like from the criminal's perspective. One of the values additions of having access to both AdvIntel and Polarity is whenever you visualize and do any research or even deploying commands or looking for the registry keys, we'll be able to highlight within our collections if there's something of interest that could be triggered by our collections. So that's the intelligence. And our intelligence is fueled by our expert team that surveys our botnet collections that's available here as well. As we found many different breaches, and including the universal health service intrusions we found earlier and many others. And that's our predominantly the quick and very quick and light view into AdvIntel that we'll highlight with Eddie shortly after part of our active presentation. So Eddie, I'm passing the screen back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vitaly. That's awesome. Looked amazing.
Thank you.
All right, Shay, so we'll go ahead and pivot now to show the joint solution that we've developed between Polarity and AdvIntel. So as you can see here, I have the Polarity desktop application installed on my Mac here. This Polarity desktop application is fully featured on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux-based operating systems. So we have all sort of 3 major OS families covered from a desktop application perspective. And then as I mentioned earlier in the presentation when I was talking about the architecture of Polarity, the desktop application component authenticates and maintains a persistent TLS encrypted connection with a backend Polarity server. That Polarity server, for all of our production customers that are on the enterprise version of Polarity, that Polarity server is a private Polarity server deployed within the customer premise, right? So that way, all of the notes or the annotations that your analysts are taking around entities or strings of text on their screen, that information stays private within your organization. We also have a Polarity Community Edition that I'd strongly encourage folks to sign up for access to the Community Edition at the end of the webinar. The Community Edition allows for accessing a subset of our third-party integrations, as I mentioned, and then the annotation capability that I specifically mentioned is only a part of the enterprise version of Polarity. So the annotation capability, the ability to take notes around text on your screen and then store those in the Polarity platform, that particular piece of functionality is not present in the Community Edition. So just to give you a little bit of heads up in terms of the differences between the enterprise version and the community version of Polarity. But as I mentioned earlier, really the entire goal behind Polarity, what we're trying to solve, again, is that problem of data awareness, right? So in this case, just a really simple scenario where I have a crafted email up on my screen. As you can see there, there's an indicator in the form of an IP address and a CVE identifier. So we're all about Polarity, bringing the contextual information to the analyst at the point in need, drastically increasing their efficiency. So rather than the analyst having to, in this case, copy and paste this IP, copy and paste this CVE, and search these particular entities in multiple platforms, including on Darial, to get contextual information around what does this IP mean, what are the details around the CVE, Polarity can bring that information to the analyst automatically, right? And as I mentioned, right, this is just a simple use case here. The Polarity tool, because we allow our customers to essentially plug and play the tool into whatever data source they want to integrate with, it can support any number of different use cases across, SOC teams, incident response, cyber threat intelligence, fraud, AML, right, red teaming, so on and so forth. So in this case, I have currently Polarity in what we call the on-demand mode. So what I could do is if I wanted to analyze the entire content of this simple email, what I could do is I just highlight the body of the email. And then all I'm doing here is I'm just hitting a simple keyboard shortcut. You can see when I hit that keyboard shortcut, this small floating application window appears on my screen. This particular application window is referred to as the overlay window. So as you can see, Polarity parsed through all the highlighted text within the email, and then it will instantly return to me contextual information related to these two particular entities it was able to identify. So the integration that we have with the Darial platform, right, not only gives us access to archived threat intelligence briefs that, as Vitaly mentioned, are published by their expert team internally. So I'm able to see if there is a existing intelligence report within that archive, when it was published, and what the confidence level is of that particular report, as well as a brief synopsis of the content of that report. But then we also have integrations within the Darial, the raw data collection as well. And that actually includes the botnet RDP data set that Vitaly mentioned, as well as the dark web data set as well. So I'm able to see in this case, right, we have information from the botnet data set coming back that actually confirms that this IP is a compromised host within that Baltimore County Public School organization, right? And I can see severity scores, when it was seen and when it was last seen and when it was collected, right? So this actually gives me access into the raw data to confirm that this particular IP is part of a botnet, essentially, right? And then what I could also do is if I wanted to pivot into more details relating to this particular intelligence brief, I'd be able to click right on the report title, and that would take me straight to the report within the Darial platform. So again, without me having to copy and paste this IP, manually search the Darial report archive and the botnet data set, it's just bringing that visibility to me automatically. And then as I scroll up, this is an example of how we've integrated into the Darial dark web collections as well. So for instance, the CVE on my screen is automatically searched against not only the report archive, but also searched across their dark web collection. So I'm able to see that this particular CVE was mentioned within the body of 64 individual dark web postings. And then what I could do is I could scroll down through this window, and this would show me each particular hit, what particular web forum, in this case, the hit appeared on, what was the name of the thread, and then as you can see here, I can see specifics around the actual conversation as well. And then, through some of our other integrations that we have within Polarity, is if I came across like particular conversation that I was interested in, perhaps it's in a foreign language in this particular case, what I could do right here within the Polarity overlay window is I could actually highlight the Russian text in this particular case. And then again, by hitting a simple keyboard shortcut, my on-demand keyboard shortcut, I can actually auto-translate through our Google Translate integration the content of that particular conversation. So here I have the translated version of that particular conversation being returned to me right within the Polarity overlay window. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, one of the core features of the enterprise version of Polarity, right, is I have the ability to add user-level annotations around any of these entities as well. So, like, for instance, based on my research of this particular IP, I might want to add my own contextual information into the system around this particular IP. So I could say here, confirmed compromise of Baltimore County Public Schools, right? So I can add as many of these annotations as I want. And then what I could do is the entity, along with whatever annotations I choose to apply to it, get logically organized within the Polarity system into one or more channels. So very similar to Slack, channels within Polarity just provide logical organization of information in the system. So what I could do is I could just create a new channel to call this like Baltimore County Public School Compromise, right? So if I add additional information at some point in the future that's specifically related to this investigation into the Baltimore County Public School Compromise, I can keep all of those notes that are specifically relevant to this investigation compartmentalized within the Polarity system. So the benefit here, again, as I mentioned, is at any point in the future, if this IP is on my screen at any point in the future, not only do I get that information from Andariel that I saw before, but then I also get my own contextual information, my own notes overlaid on top of that, in line with the Andariel information. And this also, as I mentioned as well, translates to any other Polarity users within my organization that were also specifically subscribed to that particular channel where I inputted the notes. So like, for instance, if they saw that IP on their screen, they would get my notes and vice versa. So that's what we talked about earlier by, building up that collective memory or that collective knowledge for your organization through Polarity, right? So let me jump back here to my PowerPoint deck. So that's basically the demo of the system. What I would also encourage you to do, I mentioned one of the powerful things about Polarity is not only do we have this rich integration with the Andariel platform, but we also have if I just jump here to our public GitHub repository, as you can see here within our public GitHub repository, we have a little over 150 integrations that are published, open source integrations that are published in our public GitHub repository for all manner of commercial open source tools and data sources. And again, so what you're going to see here is a mix of integrations for things like SIM platforms, SOAR platforms, AdvIntel platforms, open source data repositories, so on and so forth, right? So I would encourage everyone, if you have a few minutes, just to kind of check out some of the integrations that we currently have available within the GitHub repository. And then, as I mentioned, one of the powerful things is we've architected the system in such a way that it makes it extremely easy for our customers to plug and play Polarity into whatever data source they want via custom integration development. So all of these integrations that you see here including the Endario one. Like I'm showing the example of Virus Total here as just a simple example, right? These are all open source MIT licensed. They're essentially just JavaScript modules. So 100% of our production customers, again, this is specifically relevant for the enterprise version of Polarity, have done some degree of custom integration development. Either they've taken one or more of our existing integrations and modified it in some form or fashion to meet unique organizational requirements, or they've created their own integrations from scratch because they're just JavaScript modules. Node.js is the specific language. And anyone that's done any Node.js development knows that, similar to Python, has vast third-party library support via the Node package manager. These integrations are extremely easy to build and modify. So at that point, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Hopefully this was helpful. Are there any questions from anyone on the line? I think we can leverage the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to post any questions in the chat. I actually have a couple here, I think for Vitaly, that are already queued up. So unless there's any additional questions, we can go ahead and go through some of the ones that we already have.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. And in the meantime, I want to just say a few words. It's a very exciting opportunity from the Advanced Intelligence and Daryl to partner with Polarity. Our unique product is very unique and one of a kind, truly one of a kind, that has not been introduced to the market. So with Polarity, it introduces as a new way, a new means into serving basically the criminal perspectives and running searches directly from the context. So we're extremely excited and privileged to partner with Polarity. So we intimately provide, actually something I showed earlier, we provide already API visibility. I'll start sharing my screen in a bit. So our API visibility touches on some of the most high value botnet collections. So when we look into Endario, oftentimes you would see that, for example, we collect TrickBot, Emotet, Gozi, QuackBot, Ryuk victims, and Bazaar backdoor. So our dataset is very victimology focused. Some of our data sets, as you would see, this can be including the very specific IPs of infected victims that will include the anchor DNS records for specific malware collections. So it's very targeted and very tailored to the victims. And one of our major value proposition is to surveying the groups that attack us. So our high fidelity alerting and our high fidelity breaches, including the one that we showed earlier, that's available through Endario, also will be available and are available via Polarity. For example, when we look into Zloader and analyze how the Baltimore School District was compromised, we can quickly see that Endario already had the records related to BCBS breach. We only ones who discovered these intrusions, and that this intrusion looks like from the criminal perspectives. They also, you would see in Endario a unique aspect. Sometimes criminals would provide comments surrounding their breaches. So they would see what the command's been run, how the network looks like of the affected victims, and that will be also available in Polarity. And our unique visibility and our unique secret sauce behind everything what we do in Endario is that the most intimate view into the botnets. And it could be any botnet from TrickBot to Zloader to Iced ID, and we oftentimes provide the exact patient zero visibility. Some of our major use cases has always been in the past of whenever this incident response work you've been doing or looking into unique patient zero artifacts, we oftentimes have unique visibility into that in those components. For example, in many cases, including bcbs.org or one of the maybe high fidelity breaches to show you. So we identified previously universal health services intrusion, which is the biggest news story of the day. So we were the ones who discovered via Endario product. You might be familiar, of course, of the major story that was on our horizon of our all cyber threat intelligence community, where more than 400 different UHS systems were impacted by Ryuk ransomware. So there was a major event that triggered lots of notifications across the industry. So Endario uniquely identified the breach based on the domain trust. So identified that the breach itself contained 13 different domain trusts. We identified the scope of the breach, username, host. We identified that the breach also had antivirus installed within the organization, identified the comments inside the breach artifacts that told us about the revenue of the company, explain how criminals could potentially monetize those breaches. So all this very rich and deep contextual information available via Endario and now extended to you via Polarity is that something that excites us so much. where you can see the criminal said that the network of universal health services is $11 billion. And they already installed executable and DLL inside. We identified also the group of criminals. They called 1-1. We identified what's their external IP of the patient zero infection, 50.198.172.205. All those builds a very interesting picture of the breach itself. One of the interesting use cases I want to also show you, that just to highlight our unique value propositions. So we survey TreatBot very deeply. So for example, the intrusions we have for Epic. So we observed back on December 24th, the Epic system was compromised with the external IP 64.235.22.250. It was epicsystems.com. And if you Google Epic, of course, you might be familiar with this intrusion, because back in March 2020, they've been compromised by Ryuk ransomware. But when AdvIntel saw that nobody else did, we identified that back in December, 2 months ahead. We knew that they were compromised. We knew what the patient zero was, and we knew how and when they were compromised. So this exact window into the world of breaches that's what we are very good at, expert level. So there's none of the products that we've seen in the market that speaks to that extent, and that's what our sort of like secret sauce behind the engine that AdvIntel intimately formulates around breaches and creates a final solution that extends via Polarity. At that time, let me just quickly review the questions. 1 second.
Sure. Yeah, while you're doing that, Vitaly, really quickly, I just completely realized that I forgot to show the real-time mode of Polarity as well. So let me just take a moment here. So I showed earlier everyone on the call, in this case where I had the email up, and I can just highlight the body of the email. Or this works, again, no matter what application you happen to be working in, as long as the text is selectable, because we're essentially just pulling the text out of the clipboard buffer to analyze it, right? So that's the on-demand mode. But what actually makes Polarity even cooler is we have these two real-time modes. You can see you can toggle between the 3 different modes right from the title bar of this floating application window. So in this case, if I switch into what we refer to as the highlight mode, again, as you can see, as the name would imply, we highlight the entities right on the screen as a visual cue to the user. And so this is our real-time computer vision technology. So you can see here in this case, if I grab the email and move it down or move it in my PowerPoint deck, it takes a moment or so for Polarity to retrack and then redraw the highlights. But just to show you that we're doing the real-time text-based optical character recognition on the screen as I'm doing my work, right? And this would even work even if I had an image, like if I taken a screenshot of this email and brought up the screenshot, Polarity would still recognize these indicators even within the screenshot. And then when I'm running in highlight mode, if I'm looking at a document or I'm looking at an Excel spreadsheet, for instance, is filled with indicators, and I want more information on any particular indicator that is being highlighted, all I do is I just hover my mouse cursor on top of whatever entity I'm interested in, and then that's what would cause the entity to appear in the overlay window, which I can then expand to get the contextual information as before. And you probably have some questions around, what do the specific colors correspond to? So every Polarity user that's leveraging the tool has the ability to customize what color highlighting they want applied to the different data sources. So what I've done in this particular case is any of the raw data coming from the AdvIntel platform, I have highlighted in blue. Any intelligence reports, any intelligence briefs within their archive are highlighted in this sort of red, hot pink color. And then any user level annotations that I've applied within the Polarity system are all highlighted in green. So that's why you see this particular IP has sort of this rainbow effect where you have 3 different colors being highlighted, just a way to sort of prioritize indicators on the screen, where if I know I have multiple sources of information, that might help me to prioritize what particular indicators I have on my screen. And then in some cases, as you're probably aware, if I had an indicator on my screen, the lack of highlighting might pique my interest even more than indicators that did have highlighting. So just really quickly before we get into the Q&A portion.
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you so much. Yeah, that's actually very important questions, and glad we are demo the live version and something connecting back with what we discussed earlier with the botnet view with the specific Polarity integration. The question number one, how do you collect botnet intelligence? So our collections are very diverse, and they're unique high-fidelity botnet collections are focused on three components. We also teach part of our course called Zero to Automated, how to become an expert malware reverse engineer. So we have basically a sinkhole infrastructure, as well as we have a unique understanding of the criminal infrastructure as well that allows us to sync records and obtain the exact snapshots and view into the criminal infrastructure that allows us to identify what exactly is being compromised and who did they target. So that's one of the unique models we have. It's not just simply a sinkhole, and it's not simply as of sort of like a proxy traffic. So it's a mixture of multiple methodologies depending on the botnet and its capabilities. Question one is, how do you differentiate across other Intel providers? So currently Andariel is the key components of Andariel is the actionability. So the Andariel, it's very actionable and timely. Oftentimes when you deal with threat intelligence, the question comes down to three aspects: how timely his intelligence is, how relevant it is, and how actionable it is. So the actionability of our data sets is differentiated across any Intel vendor. Our components are based on proactive response, which is in many cases threat prevention, it's threat disruption, or loss avoidance. Oftentimes we describe the product as not an Intel product, but a threat prevention product. Using our data sets that can be used by the fraud teams and cyber threat intelligence teams or information security protection teams within organizations are the best use cases. So not only we help identify what is exposed and how and which networks can be infected and what's the future of the crimeware is, but we also build loss prevention models where we help and partner with customers to build the models that help to translate the exposure to business risks and help basically identify how we can position our product and company ahead of any other company in the industry. But the key sauce and secret sauce behind everything else is the botnet visibility that it's unparalleled from any other organization that exists. The question is, which other use cases we see for this integration? The majority of use cases are surrounding, I would imagine, Eddie, and we talked about in the bit, is surrounding botnet lookups. So if there's any IP of interest or domain of interest, it can be immediately enriched through our victimology telemetry data sets from the most secure and the most interesting botnets. It's one case. Specifically identifying a possible third parties exposed through these data sets. It's an amazing use case to, I call it actually fifth party risk. It's what really matters for us. It's the risk and from the eyes of criminals. So you'll see that perspective from the botnet enrichment integration, but also from the report side, you'll be able to see finished intelligence for any topics of interest. And that's also can be full end-to-end cyber threat intelligence cycle, bringing back home success stories surrounding executive level briefings and actions to be taken on the networks of the companies. One other interesting use case, we talked about the CVEs, common vulnerabilities and exploits. So we can use this integration to build CVE prioritization. So you can query Andariel and see if any vulnerabilities you see on your screen already being discussed by criminals. That adds up priority for, of course, for the level of vulnerability, and it helps inform the vulnerability management teams. So that's another amazing use case for our data set that we discussed happily, looking into CV 2020. And that's one of the major ones. And on top of that, there's lots of major use cases from vulnerability management to incident response to threat intelligence cycle that all are present already in this integration. Which integrations work well in combination with AdvIntel? Maybe Eddie, you can answer that question.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and just to touch on the last one, it's definitely been awesome working with Vitaly over the past few months to see the capabilities of the Andariel platform continue to grow very quickly in terms of additional data sets and being able to support additional use cases. So for right now, as I mentioned, the existing integration that Polarity has with Andariel includes access to the botnet RDP data set, the dark web data set, and the intelligence report archive. So what I definitely see is as more customers, we have more joint customers that choose to take advantage of the integration, then typically what happens is the capabilities of the joint integration grow very quickly as the customers request to integrate with additional data sets and add additional capabilities to the joint solution. So like one of the other things that I did not show during the demo, but is included with a lot of our other integrations, is we do have integrations that support this sort of bi-directional sort of action-based capability. So right now, the integration that we have with Andariel is essentially just fetching data from their platform and then rendering that data for the analyst in the overlay window. But I could foresee some additional use cases as, perhaps via the Polarity overlay window, having an indicator or something else on the screen, and then being able to automatically submit a new request for intelligence in the Andariel platform directly from the Polarity overlay window. Being able to perhaps submit samples to the sandboxing capability of Andariel right from the Polarity overlay window. So these are all capabilities that would be fair game in terms of enhancing the existing integration. And then in terms of the integrations that work well in combination, I mean, really what we do is when we sit down with customers, especially folks that are using the enterprise version of Polarity, is we try to gain this thorough understanding of what the existing use cases are, what does the day-to-day look like for that particular analyst, because as everyone's probably well aware, different analysts work differently in terms of what data sources they go to, how they do their work. So I don't think I've ever met two security analysts that do their work in exactly the same way. So whatever data sources that particular analyst is going to already, then we just sort of enable those same integrations within Polarity to just bring them access to that data quicker. So some of our more popular open source integrations are, as you would probably assume, VirusTotal.com is pretty ubiquitous. The Shodan platform is really a popular integration. URLscan.io is another super popular one, especially with some of the operational teams that we work with. And then, as I mentioned, on the AdvIntel side, some of the more commercial AdvIntel platforms, as you would expect, are some of our more popular integration: the anomalies, the threat connects, the threat quotient, the MISP integration. Those are all popular integrations across the Intel teams that we work with. And then the last question there, can you click through to Advanced Intel from Polarity? Absolutely. So I showed that example of doing the search for Baltimore County Public School compromise, where we came up with a link to the intelligence report that was within the Andariel platform. You can link directly to that particular report right from the Polarity overlay window. So absolutely. So at this point, I'd like to just kind of ask everyone, if you have any additional last minute questions, feel free to submit those through the chat. I'd like to take this opportunity to first and foremost thank Vitaly so much for your time this afternoon. It's been a pleasure working with you. Thank you so much for giving us some of your valuable time this afternoon to talk through Andariel and the joint Polarity Andariel integration. And thanks to everyone on the line for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your week if there's no more questions.
Thank you, Eddie, so much.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.